Charlie always had ideas. He would come in having given them some thought and would play something with one finger. And sometimes, I mean, when I think back to the fact that I dared to contradict and oppose him at all, I think it sounds like a most terrible example of chutzpah, you know, guts. But it wasn't. I was just acting out of instinct. But generally, I would like what he did, and then I'd say, well, Charlie, look, if we did this to it, we could make it work this way. And I'd say, sometimes I'd actually say, why don't you play those 4 notes? Like, for instance, the scene, the first scene where you see Charlie working, there's a little piece of thematic material there which consists of 3 notes repeated. Bum, 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 bum. Now, when you're going to have 8 minutes of that, something's got to happen to the music. So we would go through it, and various things would happen, and Charlie, contrary to what people think, was not doing the whole thing by any means, but nor was he not participating, because he would actually talk about what should happen and what we should do, what curly cues, where we should get away from the tune and go to another tune. And that was the way we worked. And we would play the scene back and forth, and since I'm a very limited pianist, I believe, I would be able to play only parts of it, and we'd sing it, you know, and I'd play the accompaniment on the piano too. And we'd get it so it was exactly right, and the bars were exactly right. Now, the sketches I made at that time were exceptionally rudimentary, because you don't keep God himself or one of his chief disciples waiting while you make a complete sketch, which, you know, takes lots and lots of time. So I'd make a shorthand sketch with a melody on it, any other idea that we had, suggestions as to scoring, color, orchestral color, bass parts or anything like that. And then that night, or on weekends when he was generally otherwise engaged, I would sit home and make a cleaner sketch. And those cleaner sketches were the ones from which Eddie Powell and I orchestrated. Charlie, you know, sometimes the ideas that he would propose were based on various similarities to other pieces. Sometimes they were very far from the original piece, you know, but he had a great memory for all kinds of stuff. And at one time there was a place where he said, a little Gershwin would be very nice here. Well, what he meant was he was not going to steal any of George Gershwin's music, but there is a place where there's a little secondary theme, which would never have happened without Rhapsody in Blue. It's not Rhapsody in Blue, because otherwise there would have been a suit, but it was clearly based on that kind of thing, and it is fairly common among musicians to do this. One time, for instance, we were working and we came to a place where we had to finally deal with, you should excuse the expression, the love theme, which exists between Charlie and the gamin, who was played by Madame Chaplin, Paulette Goddard. And he said, a little Puccini would go very well here. Well, of course, the tune we came up with was not Puccini by anybody's means, but you can certainly see what he meant. It had that kind of melodic, all-out expressiveness. The recording sessions were gala events. To begin with, we had such a large orchestra that we couldn't use the United Artists Studios regular recording room, which, good heavens, was big enough. We actually had at one point to move to another one. We had an orchestra of about 65 or 70, which included the best virtuosi in Hollywood, which is saying the best virtuosi in the world, and the best sight readers. And Charlie was always there, always dressed, you know, with his spats. Sometimes it was more informal, you know, but he dressed elegantly and all that, and would sit around and would kid around a lot with the musicians. He admired them and understood what it took to be able to do what they were doing. And it was, of course, the greatest thing that could ever have happened to me. Imagine spending 4.5 months with the greatest figure, I believe, in the history of films.